Paying Down Your Debt, Third-Party UI Controls and Accessibility Half-Truths with Ross Mullen, AliCamp 2022. AliCamp would like to thank our gold sponsors Intopia, Salesforce and Telstra, and silver sponsors ANZ, Deloitte Digital and Coles.
UI controls and libraries help digital projects get up and running quickly. They're a suite of pre-built controls providing implementations in JavaScript and other languages. The controls often include things like tables with dynamic sorting, auto-suggest controls, masked edit controls, input boxes, dialogues, and the list goes on. Nearly all of today's UI design patterns are represented as pre-built elements in these libraries. It's a simple case of choosing the control, wiring up in the code, and the HTML is rendered along with any JavaScript to provide interactivity. Teams don't have the capacity to build the controls themselves. If they were to build, they're looking at several weeks or possibly months of development work. There's a very clear rationale where these pre-built controls radically speed up development time. Teams' expertise is on building the digital service, not necessarily building components. So teams lean on the pre-built rather than build from scratch. It's plug and play. Drop the controls in, wire them up, and they work. That's the theory. But using these controls often bring a whole range of accessibility problems. Teams may be unfamiliar with accessibility. If you have a vendor promising they produce fully accessible UI components, who wouldn't think this is a great way to shortcut development, reduce build time and increase the accessibility? This sounds like a huge win for everyone. On screen I have the accessibility statement from Telerik, describing the market's most advanced accessibility features, how they've built according to WCAG and Section 508. But this isn't just an issue with Telerik, it's an issue with UI library vendors. Beyond building a basic static page of HTML, accessibility becomes increasingly difficult. When developing complex web applications with lots of interactivity, the pre-built controls from third-party UI libraries make it easy to add all that complexity quickly. But the way they're built means they tend to have a habit of moving away from native HTML elements, which have good accessibility, and introducing div and span elements and making them clickable. And this becomes a slippery slope. As the controls become more complex, the functionality becomes harder to code using native elements. More div and span elements are used, rendering the control less likely to work well in assistive technology. But this isn't necessarily bad if the way it works across all browsers and assistive technology combinations is documented. Whilst the UI control may follow the ARIA authoring guidelines, because it's using more clickable div and span elements and ARIA, its support across multiple browsers and screen readers can become unreliable due to patchy support. Has this patchy behaviour been documented by the UI library? The UI control may also be missing additional context-specific behaviour. A table that is filterable and sortable may have all the correct behaviour for controlling the interaction and correctly labelled buttons and be technically accessible, but it doesn't contain a way for a user using a screen reader to understand the table once sorted. So really not practically accessible. What has been returned? All UI controls have broken accessibility. They're either missing critical compatibility information, they've been incorrectly implemented with misplaced code, or they're missing extra context-specific parts. If we look at a standard dialog pattern, the dialog opens above the page with one or more clickable buttons. This is an established pattern that much of the functionality should follow, so that assistive technology can work with it. The ARIA authoring guidelines for a dialog control has a container with the role of dialog. The container has the ARIA mode attribute set to true, and it has labeling, either using ARIA label or ARIA labeled by pointing to a visible heading. Keyboard behavior uses tab and shift tab to navigate around the dialog and cycle through all visible interactive elements on the dialog, with the escape key closing the dialog. Pretty common behavior which we've come to expect from a dialog. by comparing how well the four big UI library vendors of Telerik, Synchfusion, DevExtreme and Material UI adhere to a basic design pattern will give us an indication of how well accessibility is supported. First up, Telerik's Kendo React Dialog. The control has a role of dialogue. ARIA modal is set to true, ARIA described by references the heading and title. Keyboard behavior is contained within the dialog and the escape key closes the dialog. All this behavior is communicated to assistive technology. This is a good implementation. Next, Synchfusion's React Dialog. It also has the role of dialog. It has ARIA labeling using ARIA label and labeled by, which unfortunately references its own contents, resulting in a horrendous computed name and description. The escape key closes the dialog, but the keyboard focus isn't contained within it. So we've already begun to see a drift away from an established pattern. Some of the accessibility behavior is implemented well, but others not so. Next is DevExtreme's React pop-up. It's missing the dialog role and has no labeling. The keyboard behavior is trapped within the dialog, which is good, but the escape key doesn't work and so it can't be closed this way. The last vendor is Material UI. It has the appropriate dialog role, correct labeling, and the keyboard behavior is contained within the dialog with escape key used to close the dialog. Another great example. But from this very short demonstration of one simple pattern, a dialog, it's implemented in any number of ways by multiple UI library vendors. Telerik and Material UI appear to be very good with the accessibility support provided, and then it's a sliding scale of support with DevExtreme at the bottom. When choosing which UI library to use, do you make your assumption based on the results of one control? Do you test multiple controls? Do you test none? Just what do you do? The claims of accessibility support from vendors may be accurate, but they may not. There's really no cross-checking of any claims. The products are being purchased and used by developers who are unfamiliar with accessibility guidelines, and it often becomes an approach of reading the marketing website and becoming dazzled by bold, optimistic claims. It mentions a WCAG or YARIA and people honestly think that that's enough. You can't build your entire digital product on the basis of the claim of accessibility from a UI vendor. Unless proven otherwise, accept all UI controls have broken accessibility and have significant problems. There are several indicators to help you establish if accessibility has been understood when choosing which UI library vendor, which gives you more confidence in progressing with the component library. Look for an accessibility statement on the website. Is there any claim of accessibility being made? Is there a document discussing how well the controls are supported? It's not a huge indicator of accessibility support, but it's a start. Are there blogs talking about accessibility? Is there an accessibility champion? Is there a GitHub repository where accessibility issues are actively being tracked and worked on? By having more accessibility resources available, more confidence is gained. The best indicator for when choosing a UI library is understanding if an independent organization or individual unaffiliated with the company carried out checking and are these results published. Has the UI library been tested with people with disabilities or even tested with accessibility personas? By finding this type of documentation, it means we're establishing how serious the company is with building in accessibility support. The greater the level of effort towards producing these documents, the greater level of confidence. These last two documents alone are perhaps the gold standard when deciding on a UI library. If we apply these rudimentary checks to the four vendors, Telerik, Synchfusion, DevExtreme and Material UI, all have prominent pages on accessibility and blogs and GitHub repos of varying degrees. But what's missing is the independent auditing and checking of the work. None provide this. In fact, the best UI library in terms of accessibility support with a dialog control Material UI has some of the poorest accessibility documentation, so it's clear this isn't a good indicator either. Even these claims of accessibility are mixed and should be treated cautiously. They're indicators of the smallest variety that they at least know of accessibility. The only way to be sure the controls are accessible is by checking the accessibility of the entire UI library before use in a project, and that's often through an audit. Otherwise, you'll adopt a posture of just before releasing, you test for accessibility compliance and find that, oh dear, across every page are controls which are inaccessible. By not testing before use, you're introducing a huge amount of uncertainty and ultimately accessibility debt that now needs to be planned to be fixed, costing significant resources to remedy, all of which could have been avoided if, before development began, due diligence had occurred. Testing before you use a UI library means just determining if it's accessible, yet testing once a project has begun means testing and fixing the UI library as it's so thoroughly embedded. It's too late to do anything other than fix it up as you go along. Test and confirm any claims of accessibility. Spend a little effort before the project begins and avoid the large amount of effort down the track when you find out your digital project built on a backbone of third-party UI controls from a vendor who is big on accessibility is built on a lie. Sometimes UI libraries are used even if an audit and pre-checks show they have problems. When this situation occurs, as part of efforts building out new features, you also need to now dedicate time to testing, fixing and deploying the updated UI elements regularly. When faced with a UI library with 50 plus controls, it's unrealistic to test every control, record the defects and fix. Which controls should you try and fix? This is where triaging the UI controls begins. Buttons and text controls are low risk as there aren't many moving parts. Any accessibility features can be applied without too much trouble. Fixes to these elements will be quite low effort. The complex controls are high risk and should be prioritized first. Things like auto-suggest, filter and sort on data tables, tree view. If the control does a lot of things and has a lot of functionality, expect more of it to have accessibility problems. These are the controls that should be prioritized to fix first. Some of the controls may never be fully accessible and may be a case of accepting that and finding an alternative control. Change the UI controls as necessary. Don't use all controls from the same library if you don't have to. It's better to accept a control can't be improved and to find an alternative. If you continue to try and fix the control, you're also making the change more brittle. When the UI library is updated, you also need to now update your code. Testing before the project to kick off is the only way to confirm any UI libraries you use work as they are supposed to. It helps you make an informed choice. Test several UI libraries and weigh up if any inaccessibility is worth working with. If there are issues, which there will be, is this something that can be absorbed by the project and you're happy to retrofit accessibility back continually? Testing further into the development cycle means you're playing catch up, trying to fix issues that are out in the open, and this will begin bleeding into precious development time and increase your accessibility debt. The 3 takeaways for managing UI tool libraries. Test UI tools early enough before project to kick off to understand the accessibility risk. Look for accessibility documentation, which means the vendor understands accessibility. Look for things like blog posts, accessibility statements, or independent audits of the controls. Although comprehensive documentation may exist, this only serves as an indicator towards the vendor understanding accessibility. Take the documentation with a pinch of salt. Is there a better suite of controls available which more comprehensively support accessibility? If the controls are already in use, it becomes a parallel project playing catch up to manage the creation of new features, but also manage the accessibility of the UI components by testing, fixing and triaging issues. You may be able to fix some, but you will have to accept not all accessibility issues can be fixed. If you can, fix the UI controls early enough in development when there is minimal impact to the project. This is a story about detecting and fixing early enough to find problems. Replace UI libraries with anything else procured and you will have the same challenges. By testing after something is in use, you run a greater risk of incurring accessibility debt, which becomes detrimental to a project's success. Thanks for listening. I'm Ross. I'm a director of the Can Access. We're a web accessibility consultancy based in Australia. We work with lots of interesting teams globally and work with well-known UX and accessibility companies, helping increase their accessibility capacity, and we can help you. If you're interested in working together, reach out to us at hello@canaccess.com.au, reach me on Twitter at Mr. Ross Mullen and our website at canaxess.com.au.
AliCamp 2022.